Hoglins. In peaceful mode, they are the gentle giants of the Nether. Obviously, it's a very different story in the other difficulty levels. Regardless, it's puzzling why a mob that feeds on crimson fungus runs away from warped fungus. This is especially odd when you consider that crimson and warped fungus appear to be the same thing. While I encourage you to watch the previous video in this series that explains how I arrived at that conclusion, the main point to keep in mind from that video is that I believe the warped fungi are merely crimson fungi that have been changed by, or even contaminated with, interdimensional energy. Assuming my explanation is correct, the next logical question would be, why would Hoglins not like interdimensional energy? Warped fungus is one of only two things that Hoglins run away from with consistency. The second is nether portals. There is a lot to dissect about nether portals when it comes to lore, but the thing I'm most interested in for this video is the fact that they emit light. Light is a form of energy or radiation, and while I don't necessarily buy into the arguments that nether portals are inherently dangerous, this does show that portals emit energy as a byproduct. Nether portals emit a light level of 11, while end portals emit a light level of 15. That is definitely higher than nether portals and just so happens to be the highest light level in the game. But there's something else end portals emit, or at least the exit portal does. Particles. And while there are particles associated with nether portals, they appear to flow inward towards the portal instead of up and out in the way that the exit portal does. This may be a simple artistic choice instead of an important piece of lore, but combining this with the fact that end portals emit more light, this could mean that end portals emit substantially more energy, or radiation, as a byproduct than nether portals do. Unfortunately, this gives them a greater potential to be dangerous, which lines up with my assertion that using bedrock portals in the nether resulted in the dimension being contaminated with interdimensional energy. If Hoglins don't like the energy emitted by nether portals, then it makes sense that they also wouldn't like the interdimensional energy released by end portals, even after it was absorbed by the nether fungi. But if interdimensional energy is so terrible, why do striders eat warped fungi? And perhaps stranger still, striders have no interest in crimson fungi, despite them being the same thing as warped fungi. If interdimensional energy is a problem for life forms in the nether, shouldn't it be the other way around? At the very least, shouldn't the striders eat both warped and crimson fungi? At first, I thought this meant that the strider was some form of invasive species that the builders had, either intentionally or accidentally, brought along with them. After all, they do look and behave very differently from hoglins and piglins. But this raises all sorts of questions. If striders aren't native to the nether, does that mean the piglins didn't get their string for bows from striders? Where did the builders find these creatures? Why did they bring them to the nether? If they brought them simply to traverse the vast lava lakes, then does that mean there's another dimension out there with excessive amounts of lava? Or are they even artificial life forms like the Ender Dragon? However, I realized there's a far simpler and more tragic explanation. An explanation which just so happens to contribute to the theme of pollution's effects on wildlife. In peaceful mode, only 3 mobs spawn in the nether. 2 of them, piglins and hoglins, are clearly reminiscent of the Minecraft pig both in their sound and appearance. But with the strider, that connection isn't quite as obvious. At least, not until you pull out a saddle. Once you're sitting on a saddled strider, you can use a warped fungus on a stick to direct it wherever you want to go. Does that sound familiar? The same mechanic is used to ride a pig. The only difference is that a pig requires a carrot on the stick instead of warped fungus. So despite the strider not outwardly resembling a pig as much as the piglins and hoglins do, it still fits in with those nether mobs by having pig-like traits. But there's another animal that the strider also resembles. While frogs are able to walk and hop on land, they are much faster when they're in the water. Similarly, striders can walk on land, but they are much faster when walking on lava. Striders even make sounds similar to a frog croaking. But while Minecraft frogs don't seem to be too concerned with being out of water, striders clearly look very uncomfortable and miserable when out of lava. Why are these lava amphibians so sensitive? And why don't they seem to try harder to stay in lava if that's where they're most comfortable? In fact, since it's claimed that piglins get their string for bows from striders, wouldn't it make the most sense for striders to stay in the lava where they can't be hunted? Especially since piglins are not immune to fire or lava. One reason they might leave the safety of the lava is to feed on warped fungus. But according to my conclusions, warped fungi didn't exist until the Nether had been contaminated. So how does this all work? What if, before the builders came to the Nether, striders weren't that bothered by being out of the lava? Like frogs, they would have been slower on land, but they wouldn't be miserable. While hoglins clearly have a snout similar to overworld pigs, striders don't seem to have that feature. What if, while the hoglins were able to smell the interdimensional energy pollution and thus avoid it, the striders couldn't detect it and ate the contaminated fungus? If the hoglins only ate the non-contaminated fungi, the striders wouldn't have encountered non-contaminated fungi as frequently, while simultaneously not having any competition in eating warped fungi. If you've taken a biology or ecology class, you may have heard the terms biomagnification or bioamplification. These terms refer to the concept that the further you go up the food chain from producer to consumer, the higher the concentration of harmful substances in the organism will rise. If the interdimensional energy was able to warp the crimson fungus, radically changing its color, what would it do to the striders who fed on the contaminated fungi? If you look at a strider's skin, there are parts that appear to be discolored, possibly even peeling. Discolored and peeling skin can both be symptoms of radiation poisoning. As discussed earlier, light, which is a form of radiation, is clearly emitted from end portals. If the bedrock portals did emit interdimensional energy in addition to visible light, it could have contaminated the Nether, warped the Nether fungi, and thus poisoned the striders. But then, why do striders have no interest in crimson fungi? Why do animals eat? Generally, they eat in order to gain energy. What if, after feeding on the warped fungi for an extended period of time, the striders became dependent on the interdimensional energy the fungi were infused with? That would explain why they are indifferent to crimson fungi. It just isn't worth their attention because it doesn't contain the additional boost of interdimensional energy that warped fungi give them. But food doesn't seem to be the only source of energy for the strider. They become noticeably more energetic once they're in lava. Obviously, lava contains a lot of energy in the form of heat. Did the exposure to interdimensional energy weaken the striders so that they needed more energy just to exist? Even if striders have always been miserable when out of lava, it appears the contamination which brought about the warped fungus had a profound effect on the Nether's ecosystem. While piglins do hunt hoglins presumably for food, and they also get their string from striders, there doesn't seem to be any real apex predator in the Nether. Striders are free to wander the lava lakes, and hoglins just need to avoid piglin hunting parties. Incidentally, apex predators are particularly vulnerable to pollution because of biomagnification. There are plenty of theories regarding the fossils found in soul sand valleys and what they might have been, but I think the explanation is tied to the warped fungus, especially since the fog there is also a shade of cyan. The other key member of the food chain that's missing is the producers. Sure, fungi serves as food for both hoglins and striders, but fungi are decomposers. They're able to release nutrients and energy back into the ecosystem. But how did the energy enter the food chain in the first place? I believe the answers also lay in the soul sand valleys. Once I get that video ready, I'll add it to this end screen. Until next time, take care.